have to be fair to politicians. They only will fight fights that they think are winnable. They will only take risks where they think that the alternative is riskier. And until human rights commissions become a public subject of concern, they will not act because it is not in their rational interest to do so. In fact, it's in their rational interest not to do so. Inertia for a governing party is friendly. The devil you know. It's been working fine, there's no trouble. And when you're taking on something with a beautiful name, Human Rights Commission, that's their only beautiful asset, by the way. It's their Teflon, because for 99% of people, they look no further than the name. When you take on something called a Human Rights Commission, you risk being labeled anti-human rights. Now, it'll be hard to call Wally Opal a racist, but they'll do it anyways. You have to build demand for change, and what I've talked about is a two-stage campaign. Stage one, denormalization. And that's actually the fun part. That's telling the stories. That's letting people know that they're frauds, counterfeits, fakes, kangaroo courts. And once you build a critical mass, and you actually have to inform the politicians, they have so much on their plate, so much on their radar screen, and they have staff to help them sort what's important and what's not, that unless this becomes a loud murmur, they won't even brief themselves. I heard Wally Opal on CKNW when I was driving out of town after the Mark Stein trial. And it was very clear to me that he was reading from a briefing note prepared by a staffer, that he actually had not yet even familiarized himself with the problems of the Human Rights Commission. It seemed to me, that's how it sounded. Even after the Mark Stein trial, I think you have to give him the benefit of the doubt and actually show him these nutty cases. And then you can press him to act. Stephen Harper was someone I hoped would act, because I know he has the same view as me. In 1999, he called these human rights commissions totalitarian. Well, that's easy to say when you're not in elected office, but when you have a minority government on the edge of a knife, is that a hill you want to die on? I've tried to convince him that it's safe to come out now, because even the Toronto Star is on side. Groups who would normally jump on him, EGAL, the National Gay Rights Lobby, is against Section 13. Because they remember not too long ago, it was their material that was censored and seized at the customs at the border. PEN Canada, the Canadian Association of Journalists. All sorts of liberals and left-wingers, in fact, are on the side of free speech. In fact, I have not seen a major journalist in this whole country not come on side. So I think it's a winner, both for the social conservatives and the libertarians. I think it's a winner. But remember, there's 14 jurisdictions, and the one that might act first is actually Alberta, because they've had some egregious cases, not just mine, but the case of a pastor who was ordered for the rest of his life, an order filed with court, enforceable on pain of jail, just like John Taylor, that if he preaches a sermon that is critical of gay marriage, if he sends a private email that's critical of gay marriage, he's in violation and contempt of court. That's just un-Canadian. I mean, I don't care what you think about gay marriage. That's not the point. This man's a pastor. It's what he does for a living. And he's not even allowed to talk to his own church that way. In fact, he was positively ordered by the Alberta Human Rights Commission to publicly renounce his faith, to renounce his views on gay marriage, and to publish it in the Red Deer newspaper. To their credit, the Red Deer Advocate refused to publish any such propaganda. They said, the government ordering someone to make a jailhouse confession in our newspaper? Not with our ink. But this stands as the law. This case and my case have denormalized commissions in Alberta, and we have some great newspapers who really focused on this issue. So the minister in Alberta happens to be a black man, and that's important because he can take these steps without being called a racist. And so he has actually himself called his own agency a kangaroo court. That's quite something for a minister running an agency to call it a kangaroo court. Step one, he appointed a real judge to run it, the first time ever, instead of these activist lawyers. And he has indicated that he will remove this hate speech provision. Once Alberta does it, that will actually do two things. It'll be a news peg to raise the issue here in BC, and more importantly, it will be a precedent to show that it's not abnormal to do that. In fact, that's the new way. And so I don't think BC could be a place for change, Saskatchewan too, but I think Alberta will be first, and then maybe some other dominoes will fall. I mentioned that possibility in my book, and there are some temptations. First of all, put the bad guys on the back foot for once. Any journalist or any politician who says they support this censorship law, oh, good. It's like what Lincoln said. Whenever I hear someone in favor of slavery, I have a temptation to try it on them. Or he said something like that. Oh, you like human rights commissions and hate speech, do you? Well, here's a complaint. Enjoy. I mean, so that's tempting. It's also tempting to overwhelm the bureaucrats with paper. Might feel good. But you know what? I don't think it'll work. First of all, these human rights commissions throw out complaints they don't like. People have filed complaints against Richard Warman for his hate speech. His buddies are reviewing them. They go in the garbage. A couple months ago in Montreal, a human rights complaint was filed against a radical imam called Al-Hayati, who called for death to gays, death to women who weren't wearing abaya. They didn't take it. They'll go after a Christian pastor or a publisher, but in the history of Section 13, no one who's not a white Christian has ever been charged. No Jew, no Muslim, no Tamil, no Sikh, even though we know that there's some extremist commentary in those communities. So, first of all, they're not going to play ball with you. And second of all, even if they did, I hate to say it, it would be a dream come true for these bureaucrats. Minister, we need a bigger budget. We have had an increase of 100% in complaints. We need to hire more staff immediately. And we need more censors, and we need to broaden the law. There's a spike in hatred out there, and thank goodness we're here to fix it. I mean, don't think that they wouldn't do that. Barbara Hall, the head of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, has called for a spike in complaints. It's been declining for 4 years. She would love that. But more importantly, it legitimizes an immoral system. It's basically doing the thing that we don't want to happen. Using the tyrannical instruments that we want to abolish. And I would feel uncomfortable doing that. I think that rather we should keep the moral high ground. We should remember that freedom is actually our Canadian identity, no matter what some would have us say. And we should use... There's so many frivolous and ridiculous cases out there right now. We don't need to create more of them to beat the drum. I mean, my book lists about 10 cases that are so absurd. That McDonald's case is just the tip of the iceberg. So we don't need to do that. And let's not get busy let's not be harassers and nuisances ourselves. Let's be positive. The one thing that my editor taught me to do, Kevin Libin, who actually was in charge of the cartoon issue. I just took the credit for it as a publisher. And he asked me to, by the way. He said, Ezra, this is a little dangerous. How about this be on your head? I'm joking around. We made the decision together. But Kevin said, look, don't concede the moral high ground here. This is the Canadian thing to do. We're Canadian. And why should, and Mark Stein said the same thing to me, why should we be un-Canadian and what they're doing be called Canadian? They're un-Canadian. They're abnormal. And so turn it around. Don't say, oh, what you're doing is so normal, I'm going to do it too. No. What you're doing is un-Canadian. I like to say it's justice out of the Soviet Union or China or a Saturday Night Live skit. But it's not Canadian justice. And if you appeal to Canadians and if you ask them, is this really what civil rights are about? They're all going to come over. I have had interviews with people across the spectrum, from the Tyee today, from left wing to the right wing. And Canadians get it. Free speech is Canadians. These human rights commissions are un-Canadian. We don't want to fight their un-Canadianness with more un-Canadianness. We want to steal that flag and wrap ourselves in it because we're the ones who deserve it.
Thank you.